I'm happy to be with everyone today. This is a great topic, and I think you're going to find a whole lot out that you probably never thought about before. So let's get right to it. First off, here's the agenda. We're going to talk about how to avoid mistakes in judgment, how to enhance your critical thinking skills, how you decide things, and this is going to be really interesting, I think, some tools for becoming better at critical thinking, and then we'll even do question and answer, which is my favorite part. So if you've got that stumper question, put it out there right now, write it down, have it ready to go when we get to the question and answer part. So let me continue on. First of all, let's talk about avoiding mistakes in judgment. And let me start with the definition of critical thinking. Critical thinking is the ability to analyze information objectively and make a reasoned judgment. Now, let me break that down a little bit because that's a textbook definition. And even though I've used plenty of textbooks in the years, but over the years as a student and as a teacher, I always hate those kinds of definitions. So let me break this down a little bit. The ability to analyze information is really our ability to communicate with other people and to accomplish work. That's what the ability to analyze information is. Everything that we do during the day is all based on analyzing information. We make countless decisions in a day, but we can make those decisions objectively, or we can make them based on a snap judgment or some other unobjective criteria. So the key word right there is objectively, and then making a reasoned judgment. The word reason next to judgment, that adjective for you English folks in the crowd, I know we have a couple, I'm sure, that adjective reasoned means that we've thought it through. We've applied all logic to it, and we've come to a conclusion based on all the available information. And the goal is to try to reduce bad or incomplete or assumed information from ruling us when it's going to cause us more problems. And ultimately, if you want to know why it increases your productivity, it's because better critical thinking skills means improved problem solving. And the number one thing that employers are looking for today, across all fields, whether it's IT or computer science, cybersecurity, all the way up to managing restaurants, every field you can think of, they are looking for improved problem solving because, as you probably know, problem solving is the name of the game right now. Every situation you're in at work is getting more and more complex. What was easy to do 5 years ago is more complicated. The technology gets more robust. We're getting more data from big information or big data, and we're having all these things coming together, and we have to make better decisions because bad decisions lead to costly mistakes. Making sense so far? Okay, strategies for enhancing our critical thinking skills. I've got 5 simple ones here. First of all, separate facts from opinions. Now, that may sound really simple in concept, like, wow, really? That's what you're telling me to do? But believe it or not, it's absolutely vital to your success. Knowing what a fact is and knowing what an opinion is. And we're going to talk more about that in a later slide, but I just wanted to throw it out there at the start because that's really the key to good critical thinking, is figuring out what are facts and what are not facts. And then considering the point of view of a source. If you know that I played Major League Baseball for 3 years, and I think that baseball is the greatest sport ever, that probably makes me a little biased, right? Now, if I played soccer for 20 years or 3 years, let's say, it doesn't matter. I played soccer and I say to you that baseball is the greatest sport, wouldn't you give more weight to the situation where I played soccer and I'm saying baseball is a better sport? Because it goes against my bias, right? So the point of view of the source is really important. So if you think of your workplace, think of the people you work with and think of their built-in biases. Maybe someone worked on a team or worked for a competitor and they might disagree with the point of view. Or maybe someone was a Microsoft expert earlier in their career. And so anytime anything that comes up involving Apple, which is something I use an Apple computer, and I know that's always a source of contention, anything related to Apple is always a negative to certain people because they're Microsoft people. Understanding that point of view is really, really critical to being good at critical thinking. Okay? The next thing to do, and this is easy for me because I actually studied in undergraduate school to be a journalist, and I've done journalism over the years. So I always ask a lot of questions. If you were to talk to any of my family or friends, they'd say, oh, Bob just asks question after question. He'll ask a million questions. I do. And I don't just ask the easy questions. I ask the hard questions. I ask the question that the people in the room are thinking, but no one's willing to say it, because that's the question that leads to the answer that leads to making a better decision. Now think back to the last time you were in a meeting and you were having a discussion about how to handle something, and you probably had one or two questions in your head and you said, oh, I can't ask those questions. I just can't do it. If I ask that question, they're going to think this about me or that about me. I will tell you right now, I ask questions all the time, and I'll even say to people, hey, I know this may seem crazy, but I've got this question. It's in the back of my head and I can't let it go. Can I just ask it? And they'll go, sure. And I ask it and they go, oh, that's a really good question. You'd be amazed how many times the craziest questions lead to great solutions. The next tip I have for you or strategy is break a big problem into many smaller problems. Earlier today, I was booking a flight from Baltimore, where I live, to Memphis, Tennessee, and I could not find a direct flight. So the airline was breaking it into 3 flights for me. They were taking the big problem. My big problem was I wanted to get from Baltimore to Memphis early in the morning one day in January, and they couldn't do it. All the flights were sold out. So Southwest Airlines, I think I can say their name, shouldn't matter, had it broken out for me all the ways I could get where I was going by breaking it into smaller problems. The smaller problems was one flight was going to take me to Atlanta, then it was going to go to Nashville, and then to Memphis. Another one was going to go to Chicago, and then to Kansas, then to Memphis. Another one was going to take 5 stops. The airlines do this all the time. We don't think about it, but unless you fly in a nonstop flight, you're having your situation, your desire to get somewhere, broken into many smaller problems. So as you think of problems, think of the pieces of it. Think of the steps you have to climb. There's an old saying about, the way you run a marathon, which is 26.2 miles, is to put one foot in front of the other. You have to take one step and then a second step and a third step and so on. You can't take the whole thing in one bite. You've got to take individual steps. So think of the steps when you have a big problem. Break it down into smaller problems. And you'll be surprised how many times when you break it down, you can actually course correct. If you make a decision to a smaller problem and it turns out not to be the right one, you can very easily switch it at that earlier phase. And it's a lot harder to do when you've only dealt with the big problem. So big problems really are masquerading as a bunch of small problems. And then last, related to number 4, is number 5. How can you simplify a situation? And you'll see in a coming slide, I've got a strategy for that you're going to love because it works really well. So let me continue. You may be wondering, how do you make decisions? And I want you to think of a situation where you've had to decide something recently, okay? It could be ideally a situation at work. How did you make your decision? Did you make assumptions? And here's some of the things that happen when we make assumptions. And often we don't even know we're doing this. That's the interesting thing to me. We don't know that we're making assumptions. We think that we're using good decision making, but we're not. So if you've done one or more of these things on the column to the left, you've probably made assumptions which can lead to bad decisions, which is poor critical thinking. So think about it, jumping to conclusions. Oh, it's got to be a problem with sales. I hear that all the time. Or it's got to be a vendor problem. Or guessing at what's going on. We can't guess. If you guess, there's no good problem solving that comes from guessing. Think back to when if you took the SATs or some other standardized test. What'd they tell you? If you don't know the answer, look at the 4 options or 5 options, narrow it down to the 2 best, and then choose from those 2. No one ever has said in preparation for a standardized test, guess. If you guess, you run a 1 in 4 chance. If you can do what I just suggested with the standardized test, you have a 1 in 2 chance. I believe that's 50% compared to 25%. And I'll take 50% chance of getting it right over 25% any day of the week. Next thing is estimating. Oh, you know what? That looks like it's a 15-inch monitor. Well, what if it's not? What if it's a 13-inch? What if it's a 17-inch? I had this situation come up years ago. I bought a new computer, and the IT people at the company where I worked said, oh, you need to get a bag for that. And they told me what size to get. I went to the store and I bought the bag, brought it home. It was too small. I had a 15-inch computer, a laptop, and they told me to get a 13-inch bag. They guessed. They didn't investigate. They estimated, and they estimated wrong. The next thing that we do when we make assumptions, we often act without investigation. Investigation is the key to good problem solving. We want to make sure we know all the available information possible. Next one, tossing a coin. If you toss a coin, you're just guessing. Or not asking questions. That's the last one in that left column, right? If you're not asking questions, even when it seems like it should be perfectly logical, you still want to ask questions just to test it, just to test the veracity of the information. Now, on the right-hand side, you can see critical thinking involves reasoning, analyzing, inferring, evaluating, interpreting, and generating. Now, these all make sense. What do I mean by interpreting? You're interpreting the information. You're gathering information, you're interpreting it, which means you're taking different pieces of information and figuring out how it fits together. You're evaluating that information to see if it's logical, if it fits together. You're making inferences from what people are saying or other information, meaning you don't have completely certain information. You've got to make some judgments, but that's okay because you've done the reasoning and analyzing to get there. And then finally, generating, you're generating the most logical answer. And as you know, and I know, most of the solutions that you have are generating a new solution to a situation that did not exist prior. So I was talking to someone a couple weeks ago who was involved with a ransomware attack. He was working in an IT job and they got attacked with ransomware. And they had to figure out what they could do to make sure that the employees could continue working and that this attack didn't spread. Now, they had gone to training, they had done all the procedures, but this attack was different. And he couldn't tell me what the difference was. He said, I'm not allowed to talk about it because it's under investigation. But he said, all our training led us to this place where what we had to decide was not in any book, wasn't in any manual. So we had to create a brand new solution. Now that happens all the time in business. And so that's part of why we need to be good critical thinkers. Okay, so some tools to enhance critical thinking. First one, this is my favorite. In fact, at one job I had, they gave me the award for being the devil's advocate. The devil's advocate is one who gives you the opposite point of view. And for just about every decision at this job, I was in the big boardroom with all the important VPs, and I was lucky enough to be at the table with them and with the president of the company. And I would say to them when they were trying to decide something, what if we did the opposite thing? Because they had decided that they were going to do A. And I'd say, what if we did Z? And they go, we're not going to do Z. I said, just for 5 minutes, let's talk about what would happen if we did Z. And when you shift your thinking to that opposite point of view, that opens your eyes to new opportunities to figure out information. Because so often we think we have the deck stacked the right way, But when you say, well, what if it's stacked the opposite way? It forces your mind to consider the information in new ways. And that's the key to making good decisions, is looking at the information in as many ways as possible to get to the best solution. The next tool, know your biases and how you think. Know yourself really well. You've got to know if you automatically default to this is how I solve this problem, you might want to be aware of it. And when that situation comes up, say to yourself, I'm not going to default in my usual way. That's not going to work here. What are the other options? The other thing is you might want to think about how you think. We have different ways of thinking. Some people are very logical, linear. Like I like to write things on a whiteboard and talk it through that way. Other people like to listen. Some people like to just talk it out. Knowing that about yourself can be really helpful. If you're a whiteboard person, then you want to make sure you have the time to use a whiteboard. If that's how you think best and process information, but recognize that's not going to be the case for everyone. So someone else might want to talk it out. Someone else might want to fire questions. All those things are critical. So know how you think, and also in a perfect world, know how the people you're working with think. Not just from what you've observed, but what they tell you. Now, similar to the devil's advocate, and this one tends to be a little easier for people to wrap their mind around, argue the opposite point of view. If everyone in the room says the paint on the wall is black, how do you argue that it's white? Well, believe it or not, when you go through that process of arguing that it's white, you're going to discover some things. It's a great way to poke holes in a solution. Things that would not have come up otherwise, because what happens is typically we have what we call groupthink. People get around the table, they start thinking, they start talking, and very quickly they form a consensus among them based on a whole bunch of variables. Who leads the group, how the politics of it, the time, you name it. All these unreal characteristics and things, perceptions, start to color the decision. And that's what gets in the way of making a good decision in many rooms where people make decisions. So when you start to argue the opposite point of view, you start to hear whether an argument's working. Because if you can argue the opposite as well as the main point of view, that would suggest that perhaps the opposite argument is as good as the other argument. And that would send me back to the drawing board with my group to say, wait a second, if we can't even convince ourselves that this is the right solution, then perhaps it's not. The other thing I talked about whiteboarding, I love to draw things. I draw solutions all the time. I write boxes, I put bullets, notes. It doesn't matter how you do it. It can be, I've done it on napkins at restaurants. That's just one thing I like to do. Other people I know actually record videos of themselves because they like to just talk it out and gather the pieces of that, whatever that looks like to you. Knowing what you need to do to figure something out, you need to figure out what that is and then do that consistently. The next one works so well. Explain it like you're telling a 10-year-old. Remember earlier I talked about simplifying it? Well, here's how you can simplify it. If you can tell a 10-year-old how you're going to set up a network at a company, a new company, you have got a pretty good solution. Because in the process of explaining that, you're going to realize the things that went wrong. You're going to realize, I've done it. I've explained things to people like I say, just act like you're 10 years old. All they do is sit there. And I start talking and I go through them. Before I get through 5 steps, I'm like, wait a second. That doesn't make sense. What was I thinking? Okay, I'll be back in an hour. And I go back to the drawing board. The other thing you can do is reverse things. Often we make decisions related to X leads to Y to Z, very linear. But what if we turned around? What if Y led to X? What would that mean? And believe it or not, sometimes Y does lead to X. I know, crazy. Now, I've just blown your whole world out of the water today. I'm so sorry to do it on a Thursday, but yes, there's no guarantee that X leads to Y. It could be Y leads to X, or what if Y leads to B or C? All these things are possible. Now, the last one is one that I have really come to embrace over the years. Considering the craziest possible solution. I cannot tell you how many times in my career, I can think of 5 instances right off the top of the bat, where someone at the lunchroom or at a company party or driving them home when their car was broken made a crazy suggestion because we were complaining about a problem. And that crazy suggestion led to a discussion. One or the other of us, usually me, I guess, remembered it next day, started to talk about it and said, you know, I was thinking about your crazy suggestion. What if we did that? What would that look like? And then you start into that new discussion, that new inquiry based on that crazy suggestion, which, believe it or not, I would argue, I have no research to suggest this, but often those crazy solutions are the ones that we have deep in our head, and we let them out with laughter or with, you know, when we're not in a real professional work environment because we don't want to be attached to them. But they actually are the ones that we really see and value the most. Makes sense, I think.